Hello, everyone, and welcome to Into the Terminal. Today, we're going to be talking about mitigating CVEs, which are a critical vulnerability or exploit available for your Linux system. So, Nate, why don't you jump us into the terminal?
Sure thing. The best way to mitigate a CVE is generally to apply the patch that fixes the CVE. But how do you know what you need to patch? How do you know what package to install? That's kind of the core of what we're going to talk about today. So, for my first quick example here, we're just going to try to find out if my lab system here is affected by a certain CVE. So, we're going to paste this in here. You're probably familiar with DNF check update. That's basically you can tell DNF, hey, are there any updates available for my system? And if there are, it'll just list all of the updates. Well, you can also pass in this other flag, --CVE, and literally put in the CVE identifier. So CVE 2023, that means that this is a CVE from 2023. And the 42917 is just like the ID of this particular CVE, right? So this might be the 42,917th CVE that was recorded in 2023. So we're just going to hit enter. And what it's going to do is it's going to ask DNF, hey, what about this CVE? What packages are associated to it? Do I need them? Do I need to update? And the answer is yes. There's a WebKit vulnerability here for GTK3, and I can fix it by simply removing check from the check update, and it'll apply that CVE. But first, we're going to check one other thing. Maybe you want to know what's changing with this particular CVE. Maybe it's not just, oh, the package is going to be updated. I want to see, what the change log is for that particular update. Well, good news. There's another command. Let me paste this in here. You just tack on to the end of it. What?
I was going to say, for people who may be unfamiliar, when we say CVE and applying updates for CVEs, what we're really talking about is security updates or security patches.
Right. Sorry. Security updates. I thought that was. Thank you for the clarification. Sometimes I assume too much. All right. So -- change logs, and this is a command you can use for any update that you're running, but it also applies to a CVE like this. And this is going to give us, what's the change log that's associated with this particular CVE update. And in this case, it's really not all that informative. It just says, hey, it resolves this RHEL 18173, which not all that great. Add patch for CVE 2023 42917. So you can go look up the CVE and you could probably get a better idea as to what that's all about. However, I want to give you another example that gives us a lot more detail for us for a different CVE. So we're going to take this other one here, paste this in. This is just the exact same command, except I'm using a different CVE identifier, 2023 5345. And you're going to see it's going to give us much more information because it's updating a lot more than just one package, right? And I can show you that if you'd like, what packages we're getting out of this one. But let's scroll up a little bit here. You can see, if you know what these things mean, KEBI, add symbol, yada, 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 this looks like a kernel update to me, right? And you can see there's a bunch of details in here. It just scrolls on and on. So much so that it's off the bottom of my screen. I'm going to have to clear to get my console back. So if you were curious about what that was going to update, we can just take off that change logs and we'll see that it is in fact a kernel update, right? And we're going to come back to this later. We're not going to patch this one yet, but the final question is, okay, how do we update that? How do we just apply the update? And we're going to go back to the first CVE we were talking about because it's a quick and easy update. DNF update, CVE, and then the CVE ID will, of course, do just what it sounds like. It's going to update that particular CVE. This is going to, not the CVE, it's going to patch that CVE by getting the updated package. We're going to hit yes. Here it goes. Again, it's off the bottom of the screen. I'm sorry about that. I don't know why my terminal's doing that, but it is. So I'm going to clear the screen here, but you can see just applied those updates. One more thing I want to talk about is, okay, we've applied an update, right? So, a pointy-haired boss is standing behind you. He says, we need to fix this thing, right? Fix it on all the systems. Now you have the command to go and fix it on all the systems. You could use an Ansible script. You could do, whatever, some bash foo. You could do some SSHing. and get that patched. But there's another really big, really important question you might want to have answered when you're applying updates, and that is, does it require a restart? So after you've applied the update, there's a command called needs restarting in RHEL. It's part of the yum utils package, and you can just run this. Needs restarting -r says, tell me if my system needs to be rebooted. And why is it? Did I not put in yum utils? Did I typo that? Needs. Doesn't look like it's typoed. Hold on. I did not, in fact, install yum utils. Sorry about that. Bad prep on my part, but it's a quick and easy install. So we're going to clear again and run it again. No, we're not going to run that again. We're going to run needs restarting again. And it's going to tell us, it's basically going to check, since my last reboot, have any updates been applied that will require a reboot? And it says no core libraries or services have been updated since boot up, which means you shouldn't need a reboot. It even says right there, should not be necessary. However, remember that other one we just did, we looked at, that was a kernel? That should require a reboot, right? So we're going to apply that one. And we'll do it again just to show you that the command does in fact do what you expect it to do and what it looks like. Kernel updates, of course, take a little bit longer. So have any questions popped up while we were doing any of this?
There was a little bit of discussion on enabling automatic updates, but I think that's probably left for the other side of the transition.
Okay. This should be about done. In fact, it may be done. I don't know, because of my terminal
We
being
can remind
weird.
don't forget to mash that like and subscribe button if you like us to keep making this content and would like to be notified when we're doing more of our shows.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to catch this content more frequently, then you want to subscribe. Plus, then we'll know people like it. If you like the video, leave some comments. We like those things. Let me just see if I make my font smaller. Yeah, it's just taking its time here. Dead air is lots of fun. We can do this command after the transition if we want. It should be finished. Oh, wait. Is it finished? Is it finished? I think it's finished now. There we go. Let's clear the screen. And then we'll just do that needs restarting again. And you should see that it says, yes, you totally need a reboot because you just updated the kernel. Which, you know, sometimes, like in the case of a kernel, that's obvious, right? But sometimes it's not obvious. I just did an update. Do I need a reboot? Obviously, if you're updating your production stuff, this isn't when you want to find out if you need a reboot, right? So you're going to want to do this on like a test or dev system, find out if it needs a reboot, and then you can build that into your planning for when you apply your updates. And there you go.
So it stays with us as we move past the transition, and we'll talk about backporting, which is how Red Hat typically will manage how we decide to patch updates or provide updates for CVEs. We'll also be talking about applying updates and security updates through the web console or Cockpit. And Nate, you're going to take us through an analysis tool that you can use on your system population to figure out what vulnerabilities are out there.
Yep, good stuff.
So stay with us. We'll see you after the transition.
Yep.
Hey, so kernel updates take a long time.
They do. They do. I probably should have picked something that was took a little less time to update. But I mean, how more sure can you be that it's going to need an update or going to need a reboot?
That's true. And in fact, we have a utility called Tracer that's used to kind of denote that, because it's not just kernels; it's also things like glibc and a few others as well. That if you applied the update but didn't reboot, you'd still be running the vulnerable version of that thing in memory. But a reboot will reload everything that you just patched on disk with the updated RPMs. So also we'll add to the pile here, there's been a couple of like more conceptual things in the chat, which reminds me, if you want to interact with us, chat's a great way to do it. And we'll address some of the comments there as well during this section.
Yeah,
Also, if you're a deferred viewer, leave us a comment. Uh, we do respond to comments as well. So if you have a question and you're a deferred viewer, that's a great way to engage with us. But our
absolutely.
first thing, yeah, our first thing to talk about though is backporting. So Nate, what is backporting?
Let's see. What's the quickest way to explain backporting? So, I mean, with RHEL, right? We have a focus on stability and compatibility, right? So when a RHEL release comes out, there's a certain level of assurance that the next release, or I shouldn't say the next release, the next point release of RHEL isn't going to break stuff that worked in the previous point release of RHEL. And the way we do that is by not changing major versions of certain packages. And if we do, there's a whole lot of announcement that goes along with that. However, the life cycle of RHEL is 10 years. So if you've got a library that's now vulnerable to something and the upstream fixed that in a later release of that particular package, um, how do we get the fix back into the older version that's still running in RHEL? Well, the answer is backporting. We have engineers that literally take the fixed code, they reapply it to the older branch of the code that's running in RHEL, and now you also get the security fix.
Yeah, and so I think we do that across a lot of different packages, where we maintain a forked copy of that version of software for the duration of RHEL. The kernel is a great example of it. Um, the RHEL 9 kernel is 5 something something, 19, I think. Um, go. Anyway, so like there's newer stuff out there in the upstream kernel, but that also means
514.
that 514. Thank you. Um, there's also a chance for things to change. So, for example, if we were to apply the latest kernel update from kernel.org to your box, maybe that changes the IO schedulers that are available. But if your machine was based on the old IO schedulers and you had tuning around it, that would be really bad for your
Or maybe
environment.
it changes hardware support or, changes the way the core functions of the operating system work. That happens with kernel
Right.
updates.
So we want to keep things as the same as possible. So what we'll
Right.
do is we'll take that like upstream kernel version 6 code fix and mush it into our forked 514 code base to resolve whatever that problem was, whether it be a buffer overflow or whatever it happened to be. Then we compile a new version of 514, package it up as an RPM, release it as an update. Now, where this gets really interesting is when you deal with people who don't understand that that's what we do.
Yeah.
Uh, and I'm sure, Nate, you have experienced this as well, where like somebody from the risk management team or an
Yep.
outside
Yep.
security auditor that your company has hired comes to you and goes, "Hey, you need to be running the latest Apache. You're running a really old Apache."
Right.
And it
Look at
sits
all
up in
these
the wall.
vulnerabilities against that version of Apache because they didn't actually check. They don't have this concept of the idea that you're on RHEL and RHEL has backported those fixes.
Right. And so that's where, like what Nate was doing, we're looking in the change log and using the vulnerability of the CVE flags to identify, like, this is the problem I want to solve. This is the update that solves that problem.
Right.
Um, and having that level of depth will allow you to go back to that person who's telling you to download some open source, not supported on RHEL by Red Hat software, and be
Right.
like, no, 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 I don't have to do that because I actually have resolved these CVE vulnerabilities. And let me tell you about how they were resolved and why it works thanks to backporting. There's a couple of great articles on redhat.com about that as well, by the way. Um, and so that'll help you like um, straighten out and not do unsupported weird things that you don't want to do on your Red Hat Enterprise Linux infrastructure.
Right. Right. Those are tough conversations to have, especially if you're working with, someone who's just checking boxes. They don't really care or know anything about how these things actually get fixed or how backporting works or anything like that.
Yeah, and I'll paste a link to producer Eric, and maybe he'll be good enough to put it up on the screen, that goes into more depth about what our policy is and how we accomplish it. All right. The other thing we want to take a look at is um, we looked at applying updates via DNF, and DNF has a lot of really cool options, like the CVE option that lets you interrogate a lot of stuff. It's very flexible. But what if you didn't want all that flexibility? You just want to like apply security things. So Cockpit or Web Console has a mechanism for doing that. So if we bring up Cockpit here, this is just a RHEL box that I logged into, and it lands us here on the overview page. But if I scroll down, there's the software updates option. And what I wanted to draw your attention to is the install security updates button. All right, so I can just click this guy right here.
That's handy.
There you go.
I don't spend enough time looking at Cockpit. I probably should do more.
So it's basically doing a DNF update behind the scenes. And notice there was a toggle where I could tell it to reboot if it needed to reboot after applying the updates. And if I toggle open this view update log, right, we're actually seeing the live, like, here's what's being applied to the machine. Basically the DNF output that we saw.
Right.
So almost there. All right. So I think this might be a place to tuck into some of the comments that we got about automatic updates, because that's the options here in Cockpit. So Nate, what are your thoughts on automatic updates? Yay or nay?
I get a real uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach when you use the word automatic updates. However, that's from years and years and years of scars, right? Like 20 years where, and especially considering I used to also manage Windows machines. Updating automatically it's a balance, right? You obviously you want to apply security fixes as quickly as possible, because the quicker you get those patches in place, the quicker you will be your environment will be safer from these vulnerabilities. However, when you have updates that do things like update the kernel or require reboots or maybe update libraries that your stuff is depending on, it gets a little more uneasy in my stomach. However, RHEL does a really good job of not breaking stuff with updates, right? And I joked about Windows; they do a much better job too. So, and Windows is a pretty common target. So, you know, Windows aside, automatic updating. All that to say, like, it's not a bad idea. Make sure you understand what's happening. Make sure you have automation in place. Make sure you have good monitoring so that if something does go wrong during the automatic updates, you can respond to it quickly. What are your thoughts on automatic updating?
Plus all of that.
Yeah.
Because as I mentioned in the chat, like walking into work when everything's messed up, and then after doing hair on fire troubleshooting because everything's messed up, you find out it's because of an update that was applied overnight, right?
Right.
So if you're going to do automatic updates, what I would want to do is schedule it at a specific time and day, so that as I walk into to work and everything's on fire, I know that, last night at 5 a.m. the updates were applied because I configured it to happen that way.
Right.
It's my biggest complaint about automatic updates is they happen randomly, and so things become a problem, and it's not until later that you're actually able to figure out that, oh, well, at this random time, this random thing occurred. In your production operations, you want to keep things as scheduled and as known as possible.
Right. And the other thing you can do is within DNF, there's configuration options that say don't automatically apply updates that are going to require a reboot, or at least don't apply updates that are specific to this certain text pattern, like don't install kernel updates, for example. I want to do those myself in a planned outage, right? So those are things you can look into as well.
Yeah. So just last thing on Cockpit there, if we can pull it back up. So after we applied all the security updates, now notice that it no longer offers me security updates. It just says install all updates because it's all the ones that were not security related. It's not as fine-grained as Nate was showing with CVE number tracking.
Right.
You can in Cockpit also individually apply things, right? Like I can toggle this guy open and look at it, and um, somewhere tell it to update it. Somewhere, maybe not. But so you have the classification of security related or non-security related, and it
Mhm.
may be a little bit more approachable for folks that want to manage their system in a little bit more tactical way, but don't feel comfortable on the command line doing it on the command line yet.
Yeah, and another quick comment on automatic updates. If you're unsure about it, but you absolutely want security updates to be applied quickly, you can tell it to apply just the security patches automatically, right? So that's a good starting point.
So Nate, you're going to talk to us more about vulnerability assessment.
Yeah. So the conversation we were having earlier about backporting and what am I vulnerable to, and here's your checklist of things that you need to get patched. Sometimes that's a hard conversation to have, as I alluded to. Luckily, we have a tool inside of Insights called Vulnerability. Surprise. That will help you identify what vulnerabilities are affecting your systems and even help you remediate them and even generate reports and stuff. Now, I'm not going to go crazy in depth here. I'm going to make the window a little bit bigger or the font a little bit bigger here because web pages are web pages. So if you log into Insights, now I'm in Insights that the system I was just using for demonstration is also registered to this account. So if you go into services, go to security, and then vulnerability. It'll bring you a list, and this brings you to just the general list of all systems in your estate that have CVEs that should be patched, right? So this is a nice list of just everything, right? So if you want to see, CVE 2023-7104, what systems are affected by that? Here you go. There's a list of systems that are impacted by that particular CVE, right? So this is really helpful. There's also, like I said, reporting where you can make a high level report that you can hand off to like your boss or an auditor or something. And then there's a more sort of tactical report that'll give you a like a spreadsheet of what CVEs and what systems are impacted. So those are all really useful things too. I'm not going to go too into those for this particular demonstration. What I do want to do is let me grab the host name from my test system before. I've got it here in the notes here somewhere. Here it is. And inside of vulnerability, there's a menu on the side here you can't see. If you bring that menu up and you go to systems, it'll show you a list of all the systems that are reporting vulnerabilities or reporting to the vulnerability service of Insights. And you can search for a system here. And ta-da, there's my little one sole solitary system that we were looking at earlier. So if I bring that up, I can look at the CVEs that affect just this system. So, this is my web server, or this is my database server, or this is my server where all of my customer data is stored. I want to know specifically what affects that machine because that's really important to me, right? Here you go. The cool thing about Insights is you see this little playbook button over here. Just like everything else in Insights, you can generate an Ansible playbook that'll fix this. Or if you have your systems registered in the right way, you can even fix it remotely. Like I could just check this and say remediate and go through the motions of having Insights push the update out to my system, which works really well. By the way, in the background, what it's doing is exactly what I showed you in the critical path. It uses DNF to apply the dash dash CVE um, argument and tells it what CVE to fix. So, there's no mysticism here. It just makes it a lot easier for you to do at scale.
Hey
But
Nate,
sure, what's up?
uh, so talking about the Ansible playbook that applies it, do you need to have Ansible, the extra product like AEP from Red Hat, to apply that playbook and use it?
No, this will apply with Ansible Core, which is included with
Yeah,
RHEL.
Ansible Core, which is included with RHEL. Thank
Right
you.
now, you can leverage the larger automation platform, but you don't have to. You don't have to have that in order to make this work, which is good stuff. Good stuff. All right. So the next thing I wanted to show was if you go into one of these advisories, Here, we're just going to look for a specific. You can also filter this based on CVE. I want to know if this system is impacted by a certain CVE. Paste this in here. I think it'll show me. Yeah. Now, we talked about backporting before, right? So you may have the question, I'm not at the console. I want to do some research. I'm in research mode for a CVE that I just heard about. I want to know what Red Hat has to say about that CVE. I want to know what Red Hat products are impacted by that CVE, and I want to know what packages I have to fix in order to remediate that. Right? You don't have to be a Linux administrator to be able to do this. You can have your security admin or whatever who doesn't care about the tactical like application of these things. They care more about what's at risk. Like what does my estate look like? So right from here, if I click on this advisory column, it says RHSA, which is the Red Hat Security Advisory. And then there's an ID associated with that, which will not necessarily be the same. In fact, usually it's not the same as the CVE ID. And good, I shared this in a way that it brought me to the new tab. That's very handy. This is still within Insights, and it shows you a summary of basically what Insights knows about this particular service advisory or security advisory. If you look down here toward the bottom, there's this link that says view packages and errata at access.redhat.com. Now, access.redhat.com, if you know, is our customer portal. The customer portal has a whole bunch of other KCS articles and knowledge base articles and whatnot that will go in depth on these things. So if you click on that, you can get a much more in-depth description of what this particular security advisory is all about. All the products aside from RHEL, which is what Insights was telling you about, that are impacted by it, and what packages need to be updated in order to fix this, right? So what versions you need to be at and whatnot. And before we had Insights vulnerability, this is the way administrators would do it. You'd have to find the CVE, you'd search the knowledge base, you'd find this, and then you'd be like, oh, lib KSBA, I have to be at version 151-5 EL9-0 or higher in order to not be vulnerable to this thing anymore. You have any comments there, Scott? I've been monologuing a lot.
Then you write a script that would connect to all your boxes looking to see what that package was. And then you'd output a report of where you had to apply it. Whereas now you just go to Insights and it will tell you which ones to pay attention.
But this affected products list is also super handy because when I was still a TAM, you'd have a customer say, I heard about this CVE. What do I have to worry about? And, I would know what products they're already running. I could compare what I know about their environment to what's in this list. And I could say, oh, Code Ready. You run Code Ready. That's impacted by this. You run RHEL. That's impacted by this, and here you go. It's a nice list that you can then compare. And it even tells you what CVE we're talking about. If you click on that, it'll take you to a list that's just about that particular CVE. Also a very handy thing. This gives you more details about what the vulnerability is, and you can get a better idea of what the actual impact is. So there's also, if there's cases where there's not a fix yet, but there's a workaround, these pages will also tell you what that workaround is. So you can mitigate the problem before it's patched. So you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about being exploited while we work on a software patch or while the upstream works on a software patch. All right. Any questions about CVEs or service or security advisories or Insights vulnerability or all the things I just rattled through?
So, Nate, what would your suggested workflow be if Pointy-Haired Boss comes to you and says, hey, I just saw this vulnerability announced on the register. Are we susceptible to that?
Or the front page newspapers or whatever, right? Yeah. Honestly, in a world where I'm leveraging Insights, my first stop would be Insights. I would go to Insights and I would search for the CVE ID and see what's impacted. If I don't have Insights, then my first stop is probably the knowledge base. Search for the CVE ID, find out what Red Hat has to say about it, and then start doing the legwork to figure out what needs to be patched and what doesn't. But I mean, we didn't use Insights when I was a sysadmin because it was still kind of It was still new at the time, and I don't think vulnerability existed. If I had that as a sysadmin, I would be very, very thankful.
And when we say insights, everybody always thinks about the advisor service.
Yeah.
Uh, but there's a bunch of additional services included in it as well now. I think vulnerability is the shortest route to super valuable for sysadmins.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the compliance audit piece, I need a report of all of the systems that have CVEs of, I don't know, critical or higher, right? Uh, that's a thing you can filter and generate a report and hand over to an auditor, and they can be like, "Oh, cool. My report says this, your report says that." Well, okay, this report has been whittled down by the people who made my software to say, these are the rescores. We didn't talk about rescores. There's certain cases where CVEs get rescored. Or is that a topic for our next our next dive on this?
We deferred on that one because
Yeah,
we're approaching the end of our 30 minutes. Producer Eric, we're right at 30 minutes.
33. We're getting better.
All right. So I see some conversation in the chat just about automation and managing larger
hmm
piles of hosts, which is all excellent. But it doesn't look like we have any more questions. So Nate, parting words of wisdom.
I hope everyone's learned something today, and I hope CVEs are less scary now. And
Yeah.
seriously, Insight's vulnerability, check it out. Even if you just take your dev systems and register them to Insights and poke around, there's a lot of value there.
And actually, while we're talking about it, I think we have a lab for that.
We have a lab for Insights vulnerability and lots of other Insights stuff. I just finished making one for Insights subscription, which it isn't even public yet, but that's useful.
So
In fact, the Insights vulnerability lab is what I based today's demo on. So you'll recognize some CVE IDs from there.
all right, I just pasted it in our backstage chat, so hopefully producer Eric can get it up and going as we round out the show.
Yep. Yeah.
All
Go
right.
try it out.
So Nate, you did a teaser about what we could be covering in a future episode.
Yeah, we're gonna have a follow-up episode about some more in-depth topics about CVEs. I don't think is that going to be next week? I don't think it's going to be next week. The plans for next week's show is a little up in the air because of some travel stuff that's going on and whatnot. But we're going to talk about rescoring. We're going to talk about K-Patch, which is a really cool feature in RHEL, and the Red Hat Oval feed, a few other things. So
Yeah. So join us next Friday for a topic to be determined.
yeah, which might be CVE, but might not.
Also, next week, RHEL Presents is building applications with GitLab on RHEL. So Eric will have a special guest from GitLab to talk about building your applications on Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So until next time, thank you all for joining us and see you next week.
Everybody have a great one.